The numbers are big. It's a significantly serious public health problem, and I guess government responses differ across the world. Some governments move and act very strongly, and others do very little. There's no question that governments really should be doing more across the world, I think. I'm optimistic in some parts of the world, and I'm pessimistic in other parts of the world. I mean, there are still many developing countries which are still growing. The population is growing. The population's expectations and desires to have more cars and so forth are on the increase. So in those areas, I'm pessimistic unless governments act more strongly. In other areas, like Europe, I think I'm fairly optimistic, because I think governments have attacked the problem there. The signs are that emissions are beginning to come down. Cleaner cars are available, electric cars are available, cleaner power generation, renewables. So in Europe, I'm optimistic. In many places in the rest of the world, I'm less optimistic. I must say I'm much more pessimistic. I think that's absolutely vitally important. The link between climate policies and air pollution policies would allow us to make very big win-wins. Renewable energy, electric vehicles powered by renewable energy would both help the climate, CO2 emissions, and also greatly improve air pollution in cities. Of those four pollutants, I'm most worried about PM, particles, because that's where the evidence is strongest. There's now very clear evidence across the world for the effects of particles. So that's the one where the evidence is strongest and where I'm most worried. Ozone, I'm also worried about, because for complex atmospheric chemistry reasons, average ozone concentrations in towns will start to increase as NOx emissions decrease. So that's a concern, and we need to know more about how important that is for health. NO2 I'm concerned about too, nitrogen dioxide. There's increasing evidence of the harmful effects of NO2. So the evidence as yet is not as strong as it is for PM, but it's a growing problem in terms of health effects. Sulfur dioxide in Europe, I'm much less concerned about. Emissions of sulfur dioxide have reduced by over 90% in the last 20 or 30 years. So that's pretty much a solved problem in Europe. The understanding that we have is that air pollution can act as a kind of final blow, a final killer, if you like, to people who are already suffering from some form of disease. That was the thinking, although there's more and more evidence now that air pollution might actually be a direct cause itself in for some diseases. They are changing over time. I'm currently chairing a group in the World Health Organization to look again at the guidelines, to revise the guidelines. And the reason why they change is that new information becomes available all the time. The last set of guidelines were produced in 2005, and since that time there's been a very large increase in scientific studies of the effects of air pollution. So we need to keep looking at the science as it emerges, looking at the new evidence, and then revising the guidelines if we need to on the basis of the new evidence that we have in terms of the effects on health. Well, air pollution and climate change are linked, of course, because the sources are very similar in both cases. Carbon dioxide has normally not been considered as a pollutant in that it doesn't affect health directly at the kind of levels that we see in the air. But one interesting finding recently is that inside cars, if you switch off the intake of air and just recirculate, then CO2 levels inside a car can increase very quickly within maybe half an hour to levels where what's called cognitive impairment begins. You begin to feel drowsy, or you don't make decisions so well. So, you know, there are these things to think about too. But at levels outside in the atmosphere, there's no direct effect on health, those sort of levels. Inside cars and in some homes, of course, then carbon dioxide levels can build up to levels where they do begin to affect the consciousness of people, and decision making can be reduced. It was set up in the late 1970s to address the issue of acid rain, and it's developed since then to look at other air pollution problems that are what's called transboundary. Particles, for example, PM 2.5, can travel over great distances beyond just any one country. Things like ozone also is a transboundary international pollutant. So a lot of countries needed to get together to solve these problems, and that's what the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution is all about. The acid rain problem is pretty much solved now, but there are other issues still, like ozone, like particles, and like the problem of nitrogen pollution, which is a really problem that we still haven't solved properly. Yes, well, national governments, of course, can vary in their commitment to pollution problems anyway. But the main problem that one has to deal with in getting agreements in international organizations is that you have to try and not be moving at the pace of the slowest country, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. You know, and quite often you can trade the level of ambition in a treaty just to make it more acceptable to a larger number of countries. In a way, the Paris Agreement in climate change is an example, but you know, the people have said, well, the commitments aren't legally binding. But the advantage of the Paris Agreement was that all countries signed up to it. So, you know, you kind of have this balance between level of ambition on the one hand and acceptability to all the countries on the other hand, and those two often work against each other. And that's the problem generally that you have to solve. Individual countries, of course, can often go a lot further, and some countries do. In terms of tackling air pollution, I think a lot of European countries, let me rephrase that, are doing a pretty good job. I mean, a lot of countries now are establishing low emission zones in their cities, and that's one of the main reasons for damaging air pollution levels now is traffic in cities, and a lot of countries are doing that. Germany in Berlin, Italy in Milano, London in the UK. A lot of countries, Paris, setting up low emission zones where, you know, people that drive older polluting cars have to pay more to get into a city. So the idea is that they won't. And so, you know, those European countries are making some very good, taking good steps. Within the US, California actually is very active too. It's not a country, but it kind of behaves a bit like a country because it has legislation that's different from the federal legislation, and they're also very successful in cutting air pollution.